All right, what's up, everybody? Welcome to a special episode of Big Bang Wrestling. I'm your host, Marcus.
And I'm Nick.
And today we have a very special guest in TJP. Thanks for agreeing to join us and being on the show today.
And thanks for having me, guys. I appreciate it. How's your holidays go?
Mine was good. Unfortunately, I had to spend it working, but it was good. Other than
Yeah, sometimes I spend mine working too, so I understand.
Yeah. You know, I just hung out with the family. Nothing special going on. So it was nice though. It's good to relax.
Yeah, y'all got to relax. I was spending it like mopping water up out of the cells in the pod for the inmates had to bust a sprinkler. So
Yeah.
that was fun. But so TJ, so you were raised in Riverside, California?
That's correct. Yeah, I was born in Kansas City in Missouri. My dad's family's from Missouri, and when I was a baby, I was maybe like 3 years old. My family moved to Los Angeles, and then eventually moved out to Riverside, just a little bit. For those not from Southern California, it's just a little bit outside of Los Angeles.
I had some family. They're actually from Riverside.
Oh yeah,
they're actually living out there now. Is I think my father's ex-wife now. Well, like his fiance actually. They moved back out there, so I still stay in contact with them fairly often, and they love it out there.
Yeah, do you know what part that they're in?
The exact part, I'm not sure. I forgot what it is.
Yeah, that's the other thing too. Like Riverside is, it's only just outside of LA, but the actual area of Riverside is broken up into a bunch of different places, and they're so vastly different. Like some places are like outright country. Some of it is more like, you know, Los Angeles and urban and like kind of more city based, and then others are yeah. I mean, there's like so many different levels. There's like foresty areas of it.
Wow.
So yeah, I grew up kind of in the orange groves a little bit, quiet suburban upbringing, I think.
We're from
A little bit away from everything. Yeah.
We're from like the Southern Virginia area. So
okay, yeah.
Like the
Well, see, I was actually born in San Diego. My mom and her family, they're all from up there.
Oh, okay, yeah. I was about an hour and a half north of San Diego.
Yeah, I was born in Richmond, but ended up moving about like an hour from the North Carolina border. So
Yeah.
That's extremely rural, mostly farmland.
Mm-hmm.
Like you started like training for wrestling at a young age. What made you decide to get into wrestling so young?
I don't think that I ever had one specific moment that was like, this is the reason sort of thing. When I was younger, my earliest memories of like being a baby and a toddler was like hanging out with my dad and watching Saturday Night's Main Event and like WWF and that era of wrestling. And it really just kind of consumed me. It was like the only thing I ever really loved and was into, and it really absorbed all of my attention. And as I got older, that never changed. And I always felt like that's what I'm going to do with my future. And I don't know, it just felt natural. Like, I don't think that there was ever one thing. It sort of felt like wrestling sort of chose me. Like I knew I was going to do it someday. But I thought everybody wanted to do it. Like I thought everybody loved wrestling as much as I did, so I figured, we're all going to grow up to be wrestlers someday, even though, like clearly there's like firefighters and doctors and,
Right.
all kinds of stuff, but in my mind, I was like, nope, we're all going to grow up to be wrestlers. So it was weird to me when people didn't like it. And, I mean, getting started, I started when I was 13 and, I guess when you get to that age around 11, 12, and you do like career day projects and stuff in school, and then, your teachers are always kind of forcing you into like these areas where like, okay, you need to choose something like architect or, you know, whatever, like something that's viable. You know,
Yeah, I
any kid
remember
that chooses.
I remember doing that.
Yeah, if you ever any kid that's like, oh, I'm going to go to the NFL, they're like, oh, well, that's not feasible.
Yeah,
And
pick
it's like,
something more
I
realistic,
hated,
right?
yeah, and I hated that. And you know, I always thought, well, this is what I want to do with my life, you know, and whatever I guess you would classify it as, professional athlete, professional actor, or some form of both. Like, yeah, that's what I want to do. And you know, I was always told you can't just choose to be like a professional athlete. And I'm like, well, you know, that's what I want to do. So it, instead of being turned off by that, doing those projects, it really sort of just made me start to look into how can I get started at it, you know, way ahead of when I should have been. Like, normally people don't get started till they're 20, 25 years old, maybe. Like, they kind of get out of college. They don't really start a career yet. They don't know what they want to do with their life. And then they learn to wrestle, you know. Usually you can't start until you're like 21 anyway, for consent and all that,
Right.
like for injuries and you know, and usually you have to travel. You have to, like, there's not a lot of training gyms, you know, so usually you have to relocate and find one. So I, you know, I just started researching where there were gyms and sending, you know, letters. I had to send letters because it was 1998. So it was like, there's no, you know, there's not really like websites for these things yet at the time, you know.
Right.
You pretty much had AOL.com and that's it. So a lot of places, yeah, like a lot of people didn't have cell phones yet. Most people didn't really have emails yet either. And so I had to just literally write letters and send them out to places I would see in like Pro Wrestling Illustrated, those advertisements for gyms, you know. And most places I couldn't do it because I was only 13, and I had to relocate in some way. And but luckily, being in Southern California, there's a lot of lucha libre in the area, and a lot of those gyms just, you know, like for better or worse, are not exactly highly regulated. So you know, if you can walk and get in the ring, they'll give you a chance. So they gave me a chance, and you know, the rest is history. I mean, it goes by so fast. I blink and here I am 22 years later. So
you said most people don't really start training until they're about like 25, 26.
Sometimes, I mean, you'll see people get in and maybe start when they're, oh my gosh, my babies are fighting over here. So for those who don't know, if it wasn't on the recording yet, I chose to do this interview on the first floor of my house. Normally I do it in my office upstairs. And I did it because this is actually the first time that they'll ever be on camera for anything like that. So anyway, so for anybody watching this, watching this, if you hear some grumbling in the background, it's my two little pigs who live here on the first floor. They're indoor babies, and they scrap sometimes. So, yeah, a lot of people, I think, you know, probably the average age they start really looking to get into it is maybe about 19, 20 nowadays. Back in the day, it used to be a little older. Like in the 90s and things, you know, it was hard to kind of get in when you're, you know, a teenager, especially. But a lot of people have the maturity or just real world capability to find a wrestling gym until they were in their early 20s, maybe. Like I said, you know, the information wasn't available back then. There's no Google. There's no, you know, that didn't exist yet. So it kind of took an older human being to sort of find that. And usually it was people that had gotten out of college or, you know, stopped college, and they didn't know what they wanted to do with their life. It's sort of, wrestling is sort of like a trade school in a way, you know?
Right. I don't feel bad for starting so late then. The guy that's actually training me right now, we're training out at, like, got the wrestler ring set up in his front yard. And we're training in the front yard.
Well, I'll tell you what, it's not a bad way to get started, and sometimes you can accelerate pretty fast. And two of my oldest friends in the business are Nick and Matt Jackson, and they learned how to wrestle literally by putting a ring at their house and getting their reps in and just learning how to do their thing. And they caught a lot of flack early on for being informal and not really doing things the normal way, but you know, you can't deny talent. They put in the work to make it happen, and look at them now. You know, they're two of the best success stories you could ever read about.
Yeah, they definitely are. So like when you started training, you were in the LA dojo with guys like Rocky Romero and Brian Danielson. No, now Daniel Bryan. Like, how did it feel being in there with those guys and not knowing like the stars they would go on to be?
It was cool. I mean, they were really already. I mean, I guess in perspective, they were already kind of stars, you know. At the level that we were all at, they were very well known, and they were already very good at what they did. And I think it was really evident when we all got to New Japan. So we all debuted at the same time. We all got into the gym in LA at the same time, but you know, they were older and, you know, definitely more mature and more prepared. I think from like a mental and emotional aspect. And so they were treated like star performers right away. In my case, I was so much younger and so much more, I mean, like, you know, even with my talent, like they took the time to kind of turn me into a student and like go the old school route with me and have me in the dojo and like going to Japan in the dorms and doing the squats and sweeping the floors and all that sort of thing. But you know, I mean, they were great. Like it was great to be around them and kind of like see guys that were, you know, a little bit older than me, but at a significant age, you know, because when you're 17 or 18, like I was at the time, and they're, you know, 20, 22, 23 years old, like that's a big jump, you know, that a lot of people, that's a big jump in their life. Those are the years that you learn a lot. So
Definitely.
It was cool to kind of like be behind them at that time was good, I think, for me, because like their maturity level was so much higher. So it helped me sort of like not feel too alone in that aspect.
Right.
So I'm just curious about this. So who was the trainer at the dojo at that time? Because just some of the stories I've heard about the New Japan dojos are kind of ridiculous. And
What have you heard?
well, just, you know, like what is it like doing 500 Hindu squats and stuff like that? Just
okay, so we even the dojo in Japan, it's sort of like a rotating door of trainers. Like there's really not usually any one guy that's sort of in charge, you know, and if they are, that it's usually just for a short period of time. Sometimes it's sort of like certain students are really kind of underneath specific other elders, you know, sometimes it's like that. In LA, we had, so Inoki opened up the LA gym, and he wants to kind of have a gym that had more older roots to it, that was based on catch wrestling and submission wrestling and really kind of harder stuff like Stu Hart, like Gotch, that style of upbringing, right? And New Japan New Japan in Tokyo was starting to be more and more progressive, and they were like the style that you see today that's very, you know, evolved and a blend of so many different styles. That's what they were becoming, and Inoki wanted to still have a gym that maintains the older values, which ended up being what we were brought up in. So in some ways it was a lot harder on us because our head trainer there initially was a shoot fighter turned pro wrestler named Justin McCulley. He comes from a fighting family. Him and his brother Sean are you know, jiu-jitsu and Thai boxing guys and MMA fighters, and we would have guest camps come through and train with us. So like fight teams. So like the Shark Tank guys would come down from San Jose and be there for they'd spend like a week with us. And so basically it'd be like Shark Tank or the Raw Center or like different teams that Sean knew and people knew, like would use our facility, and we would just be part of their fight team, sort of like for the week. We would just be like, we would basically be dummies for them, you know. A lot of our training was fighting in the beginning. We almost never got in the ring. We almost never did any pro wrestling. It was all grappling and all Muay Thai boxing, Western boxing. They got us a boxing coach. I almost wasn't a pro wrestler, and this is a little bit of trivia that I don't get to say this very often. When I was 18, and first there, we had a boxing coach, and it was, I think, Fernando Vargas's boxing coach. He worked with a lot of different guys. And when he would train with us, he thought that I had exceptional hand speed, and I was so much younger than the other guys that he wanted me to quit wrestling. He was like, if you come with me, I can teach you how to box instead. Like, you have a lot of athleticism, and you have a natural ability for it. Like, I would like to teach you to box, and we could probably go to the Olympics. I don't know. He's like, he wanted me to try and do boxing instead. And I didn't want to do it, but there was a short period of time where I thought about it, and I was like, maybe I should do that instead, because I was still really young at the time. And he was like, you're athletic, you're fast, you're smart, you understand what we're trying to do, you work hard, you take directions real well. So, and I just, in the end, I was like, it's not where my heart is, you know. But that was our training, and the conditioning was exactly what you said. I mean, not every day, because it would rotate. I mean, your legs would fall off if you do 1,000 squats a day, but like, you know, like every other day or so you would do, you know, 300 or 500 squats. It was really never less than that. It was always something like that. And like, you know, Hindu push-ups, like 100 of them or, you know, more, whatever the case may be. And a lot, I mean, just a lot of natural drills like that, bridging and like we had a bridging drill. They rolled a tire out. You would have to bridge over the tire, and two guys would stretch you, like push on your chest and your legs and form your body to the tire. Yeah. We had wall walks. You would stand with your back against the wall and bridge and walk your way down and stick your chest against the wall and come back up and back down again. And just a lot of things like that we would have to do. So, you know, every day was rough. I mean, we would get into the gym around 10 a.m. We wouldn't be done until about 3 or 4 in the afternoon. And all day long, it was just boxing, grappling, squats and push-ups and things like that. So guys were, you know, you felt like death. Every day you dreaded having to go to training. You really did. Like, it was hard. I mean, it was the closest thing to being in the military I think I could ever, like, I think relate to, just because, especially when I got sent to Tokyo, and it was pretty similar in Tokyo. Yeah. You know, you feel like every day is just this never ending monotonous system.
That's how a lot of things were, especially when I was in Paris Island during my basic training. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's how a lot of things seems just like it's just monotonous. There was like no reason to it, but then later on I could see like, okay, this is why we had to do this, or this is why they made us do that.
Yeah. So it's funny because, like, so I have, you know, some friends now in wrestling, and so, like, a couple of them that are younger, you know, they're in their mid-20s, and they didn't have that sort of upbringing. And now, you know, they'll work on their body and their conditioning and weightlifting, you know, and all that. And I'll tell them, like, hey, you're looking good, and you look, you know, you're looking bigger than me, and you're looking great, and you look fast or whatever. And they'll always kind of say, yeah, but, you know, I feel, they'll kind of contradict it and say the opposite. And then sometimes when we're working out, like wrestling or whatever the case may be, there's certain things that, like, my body has a natural, reaction and instinct for, and like a natural callus for. Like, I might sit at home and not do anything for a month, but there's certain things that my body will be able to do immediately if I have to get on the mat. And that's stuff that it doesn't come naturally to them. But it's because there's certain things that become permanent with, like, you know, how much you beat up your legs and your neck and things like that. Like, certain things just, like, they don't leave you. It's like riding a bike.
Like muscle memory.
So I know exactly what you mean. Yeah. And like certain like instincts too. Like, there's certain things about, like, when I'm wrestling too, it's like, I don't know, have you guys ever seen the movie Kingpin? The bowling movie. So there's a great scene that where he's sitting, it's when they meet and they're sitting at the bar, and Woody Harrelson tells was it the Amish kid? He's like, hey, you know, you should slide over a couple boards when you throw that last ball to pick up that spare or whatever. And he goes, wow, you could tell all this from just watching me bowl one thing. And he says, I didn't watch it, I just heard it. And like, it's such a funny joke or gag, you know, but like, stuff like that. Like sometimes when I'm in the ring there, I just can tell when something's going to happen one way or the other. It's like an old hockey player. They just know where the bounces are going to go. You know, you just know where the puck's going to go. There's no way to explain how. It's just from experience so many times. You just know it's probably going here. I'm going to go there. It's like, so things like that, you know, over the course of repetition, you start to know your body. You could perform a certain way, and you perceive the ring a certain way, and it just doesn't go away, you know?
Yeah, definitely.
It's like, it's like I've heard the guys say, like when they run I've heard this from like the veteran guy, you know, too, like when they run the ropes, they just know where it's supposed to be. They don't have to look. They just know how many steps they take, and it's there.
Yeah, it's exactly that. Like sometimes I could just tell from how a guy's body feels. Like I can tell what he's going to do next or where he's going to go, you know, if it's just like, you know, basic movements, grappling, stuff like that. It's just intuition. It builds intuition.
When did you finally like get your big break out of like going outside of the dojo and actually start wrestling for other promotions?
So 2002, we all started in the dojo over the summer, and then we all debuted in Japan together around October. And we went out, we had our first initial tour, and then we returned back again in May of 2003 for the Tokyo Dome. After that, New Japan sent Brian to England, or rather, I think Brian chose to go to England, but they wanted us to all kind of go somewhere. And Brian went to England, and me and Rocky Romero, we went to Mexico. And that was sort of like our excursion, you know. It's like, I guess, you know, when you get through basic training in the military and you get deployed somewhere.
Yeah, that's
like that was like,
that's like after y'all finish training, they send y'all out on these excursions to, I guess, kind of see where you are after training, I guess.
Yeah. It's like your first experience on the job after getting out of the initial phase, you know?
Okay.
And we were kind of in between, you know. They brought me up a little bit more formally than them, because they kind of came in already as like ready to go stars, you know. But you know, they had already started putting me in like good matches and stuff. But you know, we went on our excursions. I spent 2003 in Mexico, and I think at the end of 2003, the end of that year when I got home back to America is really when I started like branching out for myself, because you know, I got back, and then like Ring of Honor was only like in their first year still, and you know, I went and worked for them. TNA was still like in their first year, and I went into Victory Road and did some stuff for them, like, you know, over the course of the next year in 2004. MLW had started, Major League Wrestling, and they put together a series of shows in 2004 as well. The Super 8 tournament, which used to be this big tournament for independent wrestling, it used to be the launching pad for a lot of guys' careers. I mean, the Hardys were on it, Christopher Daniels was on it, Psychosis, like not that Psychosis, that wasn't his launching pad, but they had a lot of guys that came through there, and a lot of guys that went into Ring of Honor, their first big break was doing the Super 8s, like Austin Aries, for example, did the Super 8, like guys like that. Yeah. So, you know, I got into the Super 8 like within like the next year or so, and then, you know, everything started really rolling from there. I think it was like I had been wrestling on the indies regionally in like the West Coast for like 3 or 4 years before going to Japan, and then going to Japan and Mexico. Now that the indie boom was starting and all these places, these companies were forming, they kind of like were taking note of who was doing what where. And I just happened to be in a good spot at the time. So when I got home, it was like, oh, you're available, please come in. We'll do some stuff with you. And that's basically what happened.
So after a while, it was like the companies were kind of reaching out to you to come perform on their shows.
Yeah, like I didn't really, in those cases specifically, I don't remember. I didn't reach out to them. They just kind of found me. You know, a lot of times you do, especially as a young wrestler, you have to go out and find, you know, places to go. And I still ended up doing that, you know, for years. Like I loved finding new places to kind of move to and live, like really like live there, like spend some time there, because you can train and like learn more and like do stuff that way. and understand like different cultures and different people, even if it's just a different part of the country. You know, it doesn't even have to be a different country. Just sometimes just being in a different part of the country, you know, you learn that. But yeah, those first times, like they just said, "Hey, we know who you are. We know what you're doing. So come in and we'll see what we can do."
Wow, that's really neat. Like while you were in Mexico and Japan, did you ever have to like how easy was it for you to pick up on the languages, or did you kind of struggle trying to guess?
Yeah, I struggled a lot. I still do sometimes. I mean, I can speak basic things like, you know, things I might need. In Mexico, it's a little bit better because you grow up with more Spanish in Los Angeles, obviously, than in Japanese. But so if I'm around, if I'm around Spanish, I'll start picking it up a lot better and maybe start to speak it a little bit more naturally, and I can hear it a lot more naturally. In Japan, it's really hard. Like I can only hear some things, and there's not a lot that I can speak. I can only say certain things that I might need, you know, like, you know, time, place, who, where, what, like hungry, water, food, you know, danger, like, you know, things like that.
Oh, wow.
You know, greetings, hello, good morning, you know, good night, goodbye, see you tomorrow, that sort of thing.
Like basic things.
Yeah. Like I can't really hold a conversation, and I wouldn't be able to like coherently listen to like a speech or something like that in Japanese, but certain things I can get by a little bit.
Like when you started reaching out to other shows, like did you have a gimmick that you went by, or did you just go by TJ Perkins, or how did all that come about?
So in those days, because I was so young, I had started initially with a mask. I really didn't wrestle without one until I got to Japan, because it kind of started me over from scratch a little bit. And eventually they gave me this character that was sort of like Tiger Mask, but, you know, an Americanized version of it. And it was called Puma, like the shoe, you know?
Yep.
And so I was Puma for years after that, probably from 2003 until 2008 or 9, something like that. And so, yeah, like initially that's actually what was drawing interest from Ring of Honor, TNA, MLW, those types of places, because they saw a masked character, and it hides my age, so I don't look so ridiculous being so young in the ring, you know. So that helps. It also, I think in a lot of cases, for most people, unless people are super familiar with you, like having a masked character that feels natural and makes sense, it'll always make you a little bit more interesting. So in my case, you know, it's not like people really knew me or my personality or anything like that. So, so I was Puma under a mask for a while.
Everybody was probably trying to figure out, like, who the hell is this guy?
So now at that time, like, were you teaming with and working with Tiger Mask, or?
So it came about because when I was first in New Japan Dojo, before any of us had debuted, we would have guest coaches. So when you're asking about our coaches, Justin McCauley, you know, our original coach, he was basically the domestic coach, but we would have different New Japan wrestlers come in and be our coach for a period of time. So like we had Shinya Makabe, he's one of the heavyweight, you know, older members of the roster now. You know, he was our coach for a while. Minoru Tanaka was our coach for a while. Kendo Kashin was our coach for a while. And Inoki himself would come in and work with us on every now and then. And we would have regular visits from the director and like the president of the company. Fujinami would come in and see how we're doing. You know, the New Japan director of the office would fly out to LA and kind of check on us, like give us a report card and see where we're at, you know. Mm-hmm. And one of the first times they ever saw me wrestle, they saw how much lucha libre I can do. And at first they were like, I remember not knowing what they were saying about me because they're speaking in Japanese. But then at one point during their sentence, I hear them, you know, trade comments in Japanese and say, Mysterio Jr. and they thought like, oh, he wrestles like Ray. Because I was doing I was so much smaller, so I did a lot of lucha libre, you know.
Right.
But I had always grown up really loving Tiger Mask, the original, and so they saw how well I took to like boxing and like, you know, kicking and striking and stuff like that. And I was always a really great technical wrestler. Like it's just something that always came naturally to me. So when they would see how good I was with holds and with like kicking and like some of the flying, they were like, wow, he actually is a lot like Sayama. Like, and I would tell them like, he's my hero. So, you know, I take after him as much as I can. And Sayama was an original Inoki guy for New Japan. So he was like an original sort of like student, you know? So they kind of liked that. And the current Tiger Mask number 4, who was in the company, you know, at the time, still, he's a Sayama student. So when I went on my first tour, they were like, my second match ever, they put me with Tiger Mask 4 in the singles match. And Tiger has always he's always really great about encouraging me, like, you know, do the Tiger Mask moves, like do those things, you know. And so eventually they were like, well, we want you to sort of keep growing. So let's give you a character that is similar to this. This is what's in your heart. So they said, pick one. And then Puma got created that way.
That's pretty cool. I mean, that's definitely a person to look up to. The original Tiger Mask, because those matches he had with Dynamite, man, that's some great stuff.
Yeah, I got to meet him years later at a show for Inoki in Tokyo, and it was awesome. I mean, he watched my match. He said he really liked what I could do, and I wrestled Ultimo Dragon that night, who's also sort of like looks up to Sayama, you know. So me and Ultimo Dragon were both kind of like yes sir, yeah, like because we love Sayama, you know.
Which it was kind of wild to think, because at that time Ultimo Dragon was already established.
Yes, like it's funny because I'm looking at Ultimo and I'm like, oh man, I love you, and he's looking at me like, you know, thank you, I love this guy, and I was like, yeah, I love him too. But you know, Sayama was great. You know, he was. People say he can be moody, you know, so I was afraid maybe he wouldn't like me or something like that. But he was really nice and you know, like was really encouraging. He said he really liked what I did, and he gave me some good advice on things. And you know, I couldn't. That's awesome. I couldn't have had a better experience meeting one of my heroes as far as Sayama goes.
Yeah, no, that's definitely awesome, because sometimes you hear you shouldn't meet your heroes, but that's definitely awesome that he took the time.
Yeah, he's great. He was great.
So I guess what was it, like 2004? You did the Young Lions tournament? Or
yes, yeah.
Like how was that? That
was interesting. I think that was like the last time they had it for like, God, maybe 10 years. Because what they do is they'll kind of take a class of recruits in. Again, I mean, it's like the military, you know, and these guys will all kind of work out together and get started together, and then before they graduate, basically before they graduate out of black trunks and black boots and basic training, they hold what they call is the Young Lions tournament, the Young Lions Cup, and that's when you graduate from young boy to young lion. So you stop being a private and you start being, you know, what you rank up, you know,
right?
And yeah, I did that in my class. It was pretty cool because they don't always have a complete class. Like sometimes only, you know, some guys just aren't cut out for wrestling. So sometimes they only have 1 or 2 guys that are ready to do it. But I actually had a pretty full class. You know, me, Taguchi, who is still there, Goto, who is still there. He's a heavyweight now. He used to be he used to be a junior.
He used to be a junior because he's a pretty good sized guy.
No, man, it's so funny. They actually have our match from the tournament on YouTube, I think, somewhere. If you look up, you know, Pinoy Boy versus Goto in the Young Lions Cup, and Goto he's built like Finn Balor at the time. He was slim. Oh, wow. He was shredded, super lean, clean cut, no beard. like total like pretty boy, baby face. The girls loved him. He was great. Now he's so rugged.
Yeah.
He's like a lumberjack. He's huge and he's
he's
man,
barrel. He's a big guy now.
Yeah. He's like Scott Norton now. He used to be my size. But yeah, we were all in the class. There were 3 others that eventually got out of wrestling, and actually Nakamura in WWE. He was also part of our generation, but he wasn't really in our class because he came in as an amateur wrestling star. So they made him a superstar immediately. Like he took off right away. So he wasn't really part of us. But yeah, we did the Young Lions Cup, and everybody kind of graduated, I guess you could say. And then they really didn't have a full class for probably until like 2009 or 10, like something like that. Maybe around the time that Hiromu and some of those guys came in. In the in-between time, they had like Naito and Yujiro Takahashi, but they really were like overlapped. Like they didn't have a full class. So
I guess that was around the time Anderson came in, that time you're talking about, that 08, 09, I think it was something like that.
Yeah, because he was part of the LA group around 2000, maybe 5 or 6.
Okay.
And him and Finn Balor, like, and a few others, they weren't, the company wasn't like taking to them. Like they weren't really using them or bringing them over for anything. And it took years before the company sort of like changed direction. We're like, okay, you guys are great. We need to use you. And then, so that then after our generation, Brian left first, Rocky eventually left as well. And so did I. And then like, Carl Anderson, Finn Balor and guys, I mean, they came in and they killed it. I mean, total superstars. I mean, those guys are great. So
definitely. So, like after you finished in New Japan, like what year did you like finish up your matches and everything in New Japan?
I actually got kicked out by Kendo Kashin. And it was, let me see, maybe 2007, I think, around then. Kendo Kashin had come in and was put in charge of the Gaijin juniors. And he's a quirky guy. I actually really like Kendo Kashin. I still do to this day. But he's sort of a clown sometimes. He likes to push people's buttons on purpose. But I think that's what I like about him, because I'm kind of similar. Like I don't take a lot of things seriously, and neither does he. And stylistically, he's a grappler, and he likes a lot of that stuff, and I'm the same way. But for whatever reason, he sort of looked at me like it was oil and water, and he wanted to send me on another excursion, and like, you need to go abroad for 2 years or something like that, like to England or something else, which is not something that I'm opposed to. I actually would love to, do that. But in his mind, it was like, you need to do that before you go to Japan. And like the office was like, well, he's already been to Japan. We use him. We actually really like using him. And he was like, no, I don't think he's like ready for this, or I don't think he's good or whatever. And he wanted, and he was like, you need to leave the country for 2 years. And I'm like, I'm not leaving the country. I'm not going to do that. I have a good opportunity with New Japan already. And I'm working a lot with TNA and Ring of Honor, and they might want to have me full time. At the time they would ask me, different places would ask me if I'd stay or whatever. And so I didn't want to just bail out on all that. And he was like, okay, so if you won't do that, then you like get out of here. You're not welcome anymore. So I kind of passively got fired. He didn't want to book me back to Japan anymore. So I left for like a couple of years and just went to TNA and did some other stuff. And then obviously I tried to go to WWE and went to FCW. And it wasn't until like 2011, like a few years later, I came back and they're like, okay, let's let's get back to square one. We're going to have you do the Super Juniors. And I did that, but then, then I ended up going full time with TNA and then eventually WWE. So it's like, now I'm like kind of detouring back to Japan. Like I always really wanted to get back to there, but there was like little hiccups along the way where for whatever reason I would have other stuff that I would do.
So working in TNA the first time, wrestling for them, what was that like?
It was kind of, not overwhelming, but that's like my first experience with like major league level, like top level wrestling and that level of show. And at the time, they had just started on Spike TV. I think I did the first pay-per-view for them when they were in the Spike era, the first ever like 3-hour paper, like the proper pay-per-view.
Right.
And it was big, man. Like the atmosphere was huge. They had guys like Hogan and Randy Savage and Sting and Jeff Hardy coming through there. And then eventually, there was like, Angle and Jeff Jarrett and Christian, Booker T, the Dudleys, like it was pretty big. And like you were on live TV or live pay-per-view. And like, now all of a sudden you started to understand like, commercials and like TV times and like production cues and like hectic live event atmosphere and stuff like that you don't really get in other places. And I kind of came up training in a developmental for WWF at the time in like 1999, 2000, UPW. And that I was in the same class there as John Cena and Victoria and some others. So I kind of had an early education as to how to wrestle that way and to perform that way, like to like understand TV and things like that. So TNA was my first experience as like, a major league performer myself, like to actually like demonstrate the things that I learned and like be able to do it. So if nothing else, that was like my first chance to sort of like be around like the best of the best as far as top level stars. Literally you walk through the locker room, it's like Hogan's to your left, Randy Savage is to your right, the Nasty Boys and Jeff Hardy, all these people are like all around you and you're working alongside of them. So
well, and there was a lot of guys coming up at that time who are now big stars along with yourself, like AJ Styles and people like that. A lot of them were there too, right?
Yeah, no. AJ was there, and the Machine Guns weren't together, but they were both there separately at the time. Bobby Roode, Eric Young, there's tons of guys. Samoa Joe. I think he eventually came in like a couple years later, like 2005, maybe something like that. Jay Lethal. Like, there's a lot of guys that a lot of guys that went on to be big stars. Kazarian and Christopher Daniels, they're in AEW now. And there's a lot.
So like during that time, who like was running TNA during that time? Was that still being ran by the Jarretts, or was that after Dixie Carter had started running it?
It was still the Jarretts. Dixie was there. I want to say, and I don't know, because I usually don't get too far into these sort of things whenever I'm working. Like usually I just kind of show up and do my work and leave. I don't really know a lot of stuff. I don't even ask my own creative most of the time.
Oh, wow.
I just say, what do you want me to do? What do you want me to do? Like a lot of times it's like, what do you want me to do tonight? Like how long and what do you need me to do? And then I go and do it and that's it. And I make it work. And then I try to keep out of everything else. But I know that the Jarretts were really sort of, I think, in charge of everything. Terry Taylor was there for a long period of time as sort of like the main talent relations type of guy. Bob Ryder also had a role to play in that, and he was part of the office as far as organizing travel and scheduling and things like that. I don't remember it like when it was like sort of like Vince Russo doing some of the creative. Like I kind of forget when he kind of came and went. But I remember the first time I met him, like I don't know that I've ever been dismissed harder in my life. That was a nice experience. I remember Terry Taylor, who I've known a long time, and he's sort of a father figure a little bit to me in wrestling now. He had kind of like taken me to Vince, and I had never met Vince. And, you know, a lot of times when you're younger and you work in a place like that, sometimes you'll work there for years and not really meet certain people because you're just not that important to certain things that they're working on, you know? So I had never met Vince because like Puma was never going to be their world champion or something like that. So I didn't really have a reason to meet him, you know? But I remember Terry bringing me to him one time in the locker room. It was like, hey Vince, you know, this is TJ. I'd like you to meet him. You know, he's really bright. He's really good. And I remember Vince didn't say a word. He just listened to Terry, and then he looked at me and literally looked from the top of my head down to my shoes and then back to the top of my head, said nothing, and then walked away. That was it. That's all. And fair enough, you know, I'm just a whatever kid or whatever. And I understand some people, that's their ideology. So I wasn't insulted, but I thought it was funny a little bit.
Definitely.
And that was from Russo?
That was Russo, yeah.
Wow.
And I remember years I think years later, you know, Dixie became more involved with like, you know, with, you know, I don't want to say controlling a company, but like she became more hands-on. Yeah, like I think in the beginning it was really more of like a producer type of role, you know, funding, business, things like that. But later she became a little bit more hands-on with like the actual show itself. And then Eric Bischoff came at a certain point, and I remember Eric was actually really pleasant. I actually really enjoyed like being around Eric. I thought that in some ways he was similar to Vince, but I thought he was fair.
I hear like different things about Eric Bischoff. Like some people say he's pleasant to talk to and be around, and others I just heard bad stories of.
I've seen both sides of him, but I don't think I've ever seen anything where I thought like this is outrageous. Like I kind of understood, like, okay, like one time I remember I wasn't under contract yet, and they were using me 1 week, and I was in a tryout match with Amazing Red, and I was in a tryout match with El Generico, you know, Sami Zayn in WWE.
Yeah, I know him.
And and they're both incredible performers. And I remember the second day, me and you know, Sami Zayn had a match together, and they were kind of taking a look at both of us, but they already knew me, so it was really a little bit more for him. We put together a match, went out and did the match. When we got back, Eric made a beeline to us, and I remember thinking, just from being in that atmosphere like a lot already, and at the time, like Sami Zayn was like Ring of Honor was like the biggest thing he did, and it's not quite the same type of atmosphere formally. And I don't think he was used to this sort of thing happening. When I saw Eric coming, I was like, I'm not going to just assume this is pleasant, so I'm going to wait and see what Eric says. But I remember Eric came up and you know, I was waiting for Sammy when he came back through, and I was like, hey man, thank you for the match, and you know, it was great, and I think that you did really well, and like you hit all your stuff, and that was the goal. We really treated it like a match for him, like because I know that they were really taking a look at him for the first time. And he was like, yeah, thanks, and blah 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 blah. Is everything cool? And I said, yeah, everything's good, you know. And Eric makes a beeline to us, and I waited, and Sammy immediately offers his hand, like that Eric is for sure coming for like positive reasons, and I don't think it's negative reasons, but he offers his hand, and Eric walked up and said, I'm not here for that. You should have done this. You should have done this. Wow. You needed to kick out harder. You needed to sell this like this. And you know, that's what makes the difference between this and this and this and whatever. And just sort of ripped us a new asshole a little bit, but it was all, he was correct. Everything he said was right. Like he wasn't wrong about it. It's just, I've seen that before from a lot of people at that level. That's just how it works. And it's It's like being in the NFL. You know, you're not going to have the same type of people treating you like it's high school or something like that. I mean, this is a job. You're being paid millions of dollars. They're going to get on your ass. Like, and so he came up and I was like, I don't know if this is going to be pleasant. And I just remember like literally like very nice to meet you, sir. I'm not here for that. And just unloaded a little bit. And so, you know, I've seen Eric when he's a little bit intense like that. And I think he was fair. But I've also seen him. I've also met with him when he was really pleasant. When I was doing Suicide, he would meet with each match, like kind of like as a producer and like creatively to kind of give him an idea of where the story is going or whatever. And he was great. He didn't make me feel like I was smaller than him in like a narrative sort of way. Like I felt like I could talk to him, ask him questions. He was going to speak to me like an equal, you know? And there were times where I would ask him questions and he would honestly tell me, he's like, you know what, that's not my department. Like, run that by somebody else or whatever. And like he didn't over control anything. He was pretty pleasant.
Right, because even if he couldn't answer the question for you, he'd point you in the right direction and tell you who to.
Yeah. So, you know, I've seen I've seen both sides of him, you know, as far as when he's really hands-on and like can be a little intense. But, you know, I don't know. I mean, this is obviously years after WCW, and I don't know what his mindset was like at that time and whatever. But, you know, my experiences with him was pretty pleasant. I remember me and Sammy were a little bit blindsided that one time, but it's like, it's okay.
Well, like, I just remember seeing him as a kid on WCW with the NWO, and me and my brothers were just like, oh, God, we hate that guy, you know?
So, like, being in TNA that many years ago, then coming back to it now, has rebranded as Impact. Is there any difference with, like, how the backstage and all that is now, or?
I mean, it is very different in some ways. In some ways, it's not, but in those ways, it's actually good. Like TNA/Impact has always had a great locker room atmosphere. Like I've never been there at a time when the locker room wasn't pleasant. We all got along. You know, there was really not a lot of problems from person to person in that any sort of issue was always a performer with management. It was almost never performer with performer. And it still is that way to this day. I think the difference is that today it might be even better because, you know, the roster is really talented. It might be one of the most talented rosters we've had in years. Although we did lose like a few really incredible talents, you know, recently, like with, you know, Brian Cage left you know, a little while back, and Morrison as well, obviously. And then the Rascals recently. And, you know, so there's been some guys that have now sort of turned over and gone to different places, you know, LAX, you know, things like that. But like, what's good now is that everybody is actually kind of all in the same room. You know, it used to be that even though everybody got along, there still was sort of a hierarchy, you know, like you had like Sting, Booker T, the Dudleys, Jeff Hardy, and they were in different places. They weren't even all together either. Like they were in just like different places, and the X Division had their locker room, and, you know, some of the other like mid-level card guys or heavyweights were in another locker room. Sometimes the X Division and the other guys would sort of mix and match a little bit. Everybody got along, but we were a little bit still hierarchied. But now everybody's we're all like together in the same room, you know, like the women's roster has their own area, like their own locker room, and the men all do and they're all together. Like there's nobody really that is separated or has like a feeling of more importance than anybody else. And it really adds to the camaraderie. People get along even more now because of that.
And I've heard WWE, they still, like with the locker room mentality, they still go by the hierarchy, and like they're kind of separated.
Clicky.
A little bit. Really, all that is like you have the main locker room, and it's usually the big team room or whatever for whatever the arena is. And usually almost everybody's in there. Like, I mean, Roman will be in there with us. Anybody of any level is going to be in there. Seth, you know, whoever. But they also have this other locker room that they make up for promos only. and it's called the TV locker room. And you'll see that on the sign. Like there'll be like male talent, female talent. Those are separate locker rooms, and then there'll be TV locker. I think it was a sign, and basically it's the same thing. They just took another team locker room, and it's empty and it has lighting backdrops so that whenever you see promos of guys in the locker room, it's in that locker room because it's done up to be like a false locker room. But sometimes the more established talent, like or older talent, will go and change in there, since it's more open and empty. So like sometimes you'll have guys that like they've been around a while, or they're just quiet, or they don't like to be in a group necessarily, and they'll change in there. And then, there's some guys that just, they have their own thing going. Brock always has his own locker room. Goldberg always has his own locker room. Undertaker is always in his own area, but he actually likes to mingle, and he's really cool. Sometimes Orton is on like a bus. I think he sometimes has his own bus, but if not, then he's usually in like TV locker room or something like that. But he'll mingle with a lot of guys. He's probably the most down to earth guy that I met there. Cena always has his own bus, so you really don't see him until Showtime.
Oh wow!
So yeah, it's not really like extreme hierarchy, but it is a little bit of one. Yeah,
well, not as bad as you like would imagine it being.
No, not like that. I mean, sometimes like guys will have weird like social hierarchies, and it's a little bit like a high school cafeteria in that way. But I mean, I don't know. I've always I didn't play that stuff in high school, and I don't play it at work either. So I don't really get involved in all that. But like, as far as like, we don't really have guys kicking guys out of locker rooms in that way, like, I mean, or rather it's not like, oh, you're not allowed to go here or there. Like, I mean, it's really not. Yeah. It's really not like that. Like people aren't like, they don't really do that to you. No.
So I heard a story. It's from a few years ago, back when Enzo and Cass were still in the company. Somebody said, I think it was Roman kicked Enzo out the locker room.
Yeah. that was like, I think the only time I ever saw that happen. It started on a European tour, I believe.
That's what I heard. It was on the European.
I was only. Yeah, I wasn't on the extended part of the tour. I was just on the initial part with the Raw and SmackDown and 205s and all that. And so I wasn't present for that. So I don't really know. I can't speak on however that started, but I do remember it continued when we got home, because you would see that fool changing in like the laundry room and stuff.
Yeah.
And I like Enzo. I get along with him really well, and I never knew what the issue was or anything. And everybody still interacted with him. It was just like formality. Like when you show up to the arena, he didn't put his bag in the locker room. Like he was, changing in a different area, which I think is a little bit unnecessary and kind of stupid, to be honest. Like, I don't know what the issue was. So, perhaps something was like supposed to be done, but I just think that like who's learning something in that scenario? Like, I don't like, you're just making somebody hate life. Like there's really no reason for that. Yeah. There's got to be a better way to handle that.
Clause isn't going to teach you anything.
Yeah, but yeah, I did see that happen one time. But I mean, it's not that serious. I think most people just kind of laughed about it. Even Enzo, nobody. It wasn't like this serious thing. Rarely is anything a very serious thing. Like
Right.
So one more thing I do want to ask about the locker rooms. I know they said like when Undertaker was regularly wrestling with WWE, especially like the SmackDown brand, they would do this thing like a wrestler's court, or like what was the deal with that? How did that work out?
I don't think I was ever around for a WWE one. It was sort of like not a thing anymore by the time I got there in 2016. I want to say maybe there were a couple instances where they sort of had something, but they were really a lot better about that because they had just been cracking down on people being too ridiculous, in those scenarios over the years. I was, however, witness a couple in TNA. Like we had a few of those in TNA, but
how does
but I never saw any
work exactly. Like in TNA.
I mean, it was never at least the things that I had saw or was a part of, like, there was never anything malicious or extreme. It was really just more playful in nature. And everybody kind of laughed about it. There was no bullying going on, I guess you could say. Cause I've heard some pretty extreme stuff from over the years. And when I was younger in indie locker rooms and other places, I've seen some pretty extreme, like, ribs and jokes and just things of that nature it wasn't quite wrestler's court, but it was the same idea. Like, right. And, but, at the higher levels, I only ever really experienced it in TNA, and it was, we appoint somebody a pretend judge, and we appoint somebody a pretend lawyer, and then the person that the locker room has an issue with gets his own lawyer, which is usually one of his friends that the boys really like and is like the go-between. And we already are laughing about it. It's pretty much already forgiven before it starts.
So it's like kind of one of those, like, once it starts deals.
Yes, like once it starts, it's really already been solved. We're just kind of joking about it at that point. And then, usually it ends with somebody like having some sort of like olive branch of, peace, like settlement, so to speak. Like if somebody was like guilty of being rude or kind of like stepping over a boundary, then, they end up, buying a round of drinks for the locker room or something like that. I know that there's been more extreme stuff like with other places in the past, but what I saw, it was always really like peaceful and friendly and not malicious. Like, guys will end up just buying like a couple bottles of Jack for the locker room after the show. Like that, that'll be like the ruling or the judgment or something, because the guy did something stupid,
Is a lot of the ones I've heard, like, that's what it was. Oh, well, you got to buy all the beer tonight or something like that,
Yeah, something like
just
that.
Just things like that, just funning with each other pretty much. But
I never really saw anything malicious. They were usually playful in nature.
So like, when you got the call for to compete in the Cruiserweight Classic with WWE, what promotion were you competing in at that time?
So I had finished my contract with TNA at the start of 2015. And at the time, I didn't want to stay, and they were fine with just not renewing it. So I was like, I would like to go. And I just didn't like playing the Manic character at the time. And I kind of wanted to get back to Japan, like I had said, and so I was like, I think I want to do some other stuff. So they were like, that's fine. We don't really know what we'll do with you. And at the time, the company was in a big state of transition. So, anybody that really, they didn't really know what to do with, and they didn't feel like they understood, they were like, that's fine. If you want to go, you can go. So when my contract was up, I was just like, I would rather not re-sign. And they were like, that's fine. So I spent 2015 just doing all that type of stuff. Like I went back to Mexico a lot. I liked going to Mexico. I was selective with indies. I did some things, but I didn't do a whole lot of stuff. And, WWE Regal had just called me and was like, we're going to put together this project, this tournament. And, we'd like you to be part of it. And, he asked me to help kind of scout wrestlers for him too. He would ask me, like, have you come across somebody that we don't know of yet? Like somebody that you think, because at that time I was starting to get more experienced at that time. I was like 15, 16, 17 years in the business. So he would ask me have you been anywhere where you think this person will be good for our type of company, and so, I'd kind of tell him if there was somebody I saw, but, I just knew I would do this thing. I didn't think I was going to stay. I really wanted to go back to New Japan. And, so I was really just freelance. And then I came in, did the tournament. Right before the tournament, I had met with Lucha Undergrounds, and I came in and did one match with Penta that wasn't taped. We just did it for the live audience. And they were interested in having me, and kind of, I think they had sent me an offer for the next season or two or something like that. And I really wanted to do Lucha Underground. I've always thought that that's such a unique show, and I always thought it'd be so cool to do a wrestling show that's like a drama like that, Yeah. And So I really wanted to do that. And when I did the Cruiserweight tournament, we did it, and they made me an offer initially. I turned it down, and then even after it was over, I still wasn't signed. And I told them honestly, I said, I don't know if I want to stay. I do want to go back to Japan, and I do want to go to Lucha Underground. It's seems like a fun project. It's probably not going to be around forever, and it wasn't. I'm kind of sad I didn't do it. But
a few years.
Yeah, but it was, and again, it was Regal that really kind of pulled me aside and said, you're getting older, you're starting to get into your prime, and you should settle down, make some money. If you don't like it, you can leave in a few years. And so I chose to sign, and I'm glad I did. I mean, obviously, like it was a great opportunity, and I got to do a lot of great stuff, and I got to do stuff that most people don't get to do. Win a title, and do a lot of cool stuff. So I'm glad I did.
So, like, when did you find out that you were going to win the overall tournament?
So like I said earlier, I don't really ever ask about creative. So I didn't really I had so many experiences coming into WWE previously where it was like jump, how high, and be there on time, follow the dress code and all that stuff. And it's so weird because they have this way of treating you like crap when you're doing everything they're asking you to do. And I remember earlier in previous experiences, at one point, I just stopped following those directions. I would show up late, if not on purpose, but if I wasn't on time, I didn't worry about it. I didn't follow the dress code. I wore whatever I wanted. There were times where I didn't even bring gear because I just figured, oh, this seems like a show where I'm probably not going to do anything, so I'm not going to bring gear. I'm just going to check in, be there. If they need somebody to stand in the background, I will. And otherwise, I'm just going to eat catering and do whatever they ask and leave. And I remember they were like, it couldn't have been more opposite. When I was doing those things, all of a sudden they wanted me to be as much part of the show as I could. They're like, we have these matches for you. And I'm like, I don't have gear. And I remember thinking, oh, I'm going to get range. And they're like, oh, go see the seamstress. She's going to make you some tights real quick. And I was like, okay, I'll do that. And then, so I did, I wrestled Sheamus and then did a little spot with Miz and Marty Jannetty one time. And so when I did the Cruiserweight tournament, I was just very hands off. I was like, I don't care what we're doing. I'm just going to do my matches as best I can. I knew it was going to end up being something that was going to be part of history because WWE had never done something like that before. So I'm like, this is good to be a part of, but I'm not going to really get married to it. So I stayed out of it. I never asked what we were doing or where we were going with it. I never asked. I waited until we got to the show, like, hey, you're winning, so go do this. And I would do my match, and that was it. I didn't really care. I wouldn't even. I would, but I think they ended up not telling me I was winning until the very last day. Oh no, I'm sorry, not the very last day. I knew that I was going to the finals from round 2 because they asked me who I wanted to wrestle in the finals.
Oh wow!
And but they said it's going to be either Zach or Metallic, and I asked for Zach, and they said okay. But then they came back later and they said we think it'd rather be Metallic, and I said okay. So I knew from after the Gargano match, maybe, because they also offered me a contract after that match. And that was when I said no at first.
Right.
But ever since the beginning, I remember they kind of had given me weird preferential treatment, weirdly preferential. I would show up late for a meeting and they wouldn't chastise me. They would be like, they'd pull me into a different room and they'd say, hold, we'll catch you up on it, don't worry. And they'd give me all the info, and I was like, why are you treating me so good? It felt like they were protecting me.
Yeah.
And every time guys were doing interviews and taking footage, I would end up doing twice as many interviews. I would do multiple, and I was like, why? Some guys are only just doing one. How I'm doing 3,
Huh.
And then I remember sometimes if we were putting together matches or something like that, a referee from the company or somebody might pull me aside and be like, hey, don't do this or that. You might, they might not like it or whatever. And it wasn't until later that one of the referees had told me, they're like, they told me I knew what they were going to do with you. So he would tell me little tips here and there, to make sure that I didn't end up pissing him off or something like that. So apparently, unbeknownst to me, I should have known from the beginning because they were treating me like we're not going to let you go. But, I didn't really ask about it till the end because I didn't really care. I remember me and Ibushi literally were sitting there thinking about what to do for the match. And Matt Bloom, the head coach for the PC, pulled me aside and he was super excited. He was very happy and kind of giddy talking to me. And he was like, "Why aren't you more excited?" And I'm like, "Just want to do my job. I'm happy. I'm excited. I'm happy." And he's like, "You don't know, do you?" And I was like, "I don't know what you're talking about." And he's like, "You're going through. You're doing it all." I'm like, "Well, okay." I never asked those questions, so. But I probably would have known. I probably would have known from the beginning if I had asked, because they treated me like important when I wasn't really any more important than anybody else.
Right. I watched one of the matches from the Cruiserweight Classic the other night. It was actually the match between you and Ibushi. And that was probably I'd say one of the top Cruiserweight matches I've seen in a while.
Well, he's an amazing performer, Yeah, he's really good. I don't know if everybody knows how he's really good. I liked it a lot.
One of the first times I watched him, because I don't really watch. I haven't really started getting into like the New Japan until probably the last couple months, honestly. When me and Nick started doing the podcast, he started getting me into New Japan.
Yeah. Well, yeah. We had met each other in the Super Juniors before. In 2011, we didn't wrestle because we were in different brackets. But I met him, got to know him a little bit then, and then before I got to WWE, we both were together in this big tag match, like me, Ibushi, Johnny Gargano, and I think that was it. And then versus Will Ospreay, Marty Scurll, and Aleister Black. So there's like a lot of dudes that were like the who's who of wrestling. We did this indie show right before WrestleMania in Texas. It was that WrestleMania. So, I got to work with Ibushi then a little bit as a team. And then, so by the time we did the tournament, we knew each other pretty well. And, he's a New Japan guy, and has been for a few years at that point. So like for me, I'm familiar with what he needs in the ring, like how he needs to function. So for me, that it was an easy match to kind of do with him, because I knew what he needed to do. And same thing with Metallic, coming up in Lucha Libre, and he was a CMLL guy, so was I. So like I knew what he needs in order for that match to go well. So I just tried to make it work with each guy.
So like out of that whole tournament, what was probably the best match, like your favorite one that you worked?
Two come to mind. All of them in their own way. Ibushi seems to be a big point for everybody, and I did like that one a lot. But maybe I want to say one of my favorites is probably Gargano. Me and Gargano, I thought, was maybe the most interesting one, because there was a lot going on with it, and I was really happy with it myself. And the one with Rich Swann was great too. That was one of Shawn Michaels' first kind of days on the job. Like he had just kind of been coming in to start being a coach and a producer, and he hadn't really done that yet or really been part of the system. And I remember him and Terry Taylor sort of kind of oversaw our match, and that was like sort of his first experience like being that guy. And I remember kind of talking to Rich like, wow, like if we do a bad job in the main event, that's on us, because Mr. Main Event is the guy in charge of this right now. Like it's not going to fall on his shoulders. He's the greatest of all time. So I was like, all right, well, so that was really cool. And Sean's a hero of mine. So it was a dream come true to be able to kind of learn from him and like follow his lead that day and sort of, just get his take on everything, what he likes, what he thinks is good and things like that. And he went on to become a mentor for me while I was in the company. I would meet with him every week and sit down with him one-on-one and just, get, wrestling like lectures, life lectures, just anything. Like he was great. So the match with Swan was special to me for that reason too.
What, like when you would ask him for advice, like what type of advice would he give you, like as far as your matches or wrestling, things of that nature?
So a lot of it was like, it's hard to describe because like a lot of it's like philosophical in a way that it may not make sense if you weren't a wrestler. Like it'd just be a little weird. to describe. And some of it I don't want to say openly because it's some of his advice was working against the administration.
Oh.
So I don't want to reveal those pieces of advice because that's really valuable for performers. So I like to be able to give it to people when I'm with a younger performer, and I'm like, listen, in this situation, you know, if you run into this problem, you could do this. And like, it's sort of a way to beat management peacefully. Right. So I don't want to just say that out like right now because it's not something that everybody should know. But
I get
you know,
that.
he would tell me, he would tell me little things like, you know, because I would ask him like, hey, you know, did you ever run into this problem when you were my age and younger and doing, you know, main events on Raw or whatever, you know, because it was like he would always compare to me, like say 205 or like Raw, like we had a small roster on like a 1 hour show. And that's what like Raw when he was like, you know, 28, 30 years old was for him. You know, it was kind of a shorter roster, shorter show. And I would draw a lot of the same comparisons and ask him questions. When you were young and you ran into this problem, what would you do? And so he would give me little tips like, you know, if it was like a time management thing or like a creative thing or like a production thing or something, he would tell me, he's like, this is how you can get around that, or this is how you can do this or that or whatever. And those are great. And then sometimes, you know, it was just life lessons. Like I remember one time he actually just was like, it's kind of lonely at the top, don't you think? And I was like, didn't really understood what he mean at first, but he's like, you know, you think that you want to be at the top of the card and sort of be the guy leading a group or whatever. And he's like, when I became world champion, he was telling me, he's like, when I became world champion, it was really lonely. You finish the show and they're already breaking down the set. When you get back to the locker room, half the locker room is already on the road to the next town. You're showering alone in a dirty shower in an empty locker room. And everybody's moving on with their life. And he's like, you think that it's going to be better than that. And it's not. And I remember like, he told me that because he could see that I could relate. Like, I would close 205 sometimes, or, you know, or I would be used in a cruiserweight spot on Raw, whereas the other cruiserweights weren't getting on, so that they would be gone out of the locker room. Or like I would, you know, do 205 after SmackDown or something. And then when I get back, SmackDown locker room is already gone. The production crew is already breaking, you know, stuff down. And I'm like by myself. And it's like, you think that it's more glamorous than that. And it was his way of sort of being like a father figure and saying, right, I understand what you're going through, you know, because you try to get to a spot where you feel like you're doing well and you feel alone. So he would do stuff like that all the time, like give me kind of life advice, like how to manage, you know, like, you know, if you're dealing with somebody that's uncomfortable to communicate with, like, here's how you can do better. And, you know, and it's based on stuff that he struggled with too when he was younger. So it was great. He would do stuff like that all the time for me.
I know, like when you were champion on Raw, cruiserweight champion, you were on there almost every week, and you had like a pretty good spot on the card. And then like after a while, it's like they kind of ran out of things for you, like
I think really it was, I mean, there's sort of two entities involved, and neither one like was directly communicative with the other. You have like your PC NXT you know, network show type crew that does a lot of production for those shows and the creative for those shows, and that's totally separate from the Raw SmackDown pay-per-view crews for those shows, and different producers, different writers, different, you know, everything is different. So when we were sort of like this in-between entity, we started as like this network tournament and then transferred over to like the main roster. And now it's like that whole creative team, the writers, the producers, everybody's like, we don't know any of these guys. We don't know what to do with them. And quite frankly, a lot of us, we don't really care what they do. So then it was like we were starting from scratch with no springboard, you know. And Vince was actually very interested in trying to get us going, but I don't think that he knew what to do with us either. Because we would meet with them same as any talent. We were just treated like any other main roster person. But like, I mean, we had to hit the ground sprinting. Everybody else had this head start, and we were not going to catch up. And And I think at a certain point, it kind of hurt us to make when we started building the show around single people. Like when I came in, I didn't like my character didn't dominate like the title for a long time. Like I had it for a little bit, then Kendrick had it for a little bit, then Swan had it for like it was moving.
Yeah.
And I think when you're introducing a group of strangers, you have to kind of do that a little bit. Because I know that people think the ideology is the title means more when
it stays with one
it's
person.
built around one. Yes, but that's only if every character is already established.
Yeah.
Because then, if you spend years with Bret Hart as a champion, it's not bad for Shawn, Lex Luger, Yokozuna, Owen Hart, British Bulldog to take all these losses because you already know who they are. They're stars. They've been around for years. It's good to have it because now when somebody beats Bret, okay, that's a big deal. But now every week, a total stranger is just losing to Neville or to, Enzo or to, whoever the one guy is. And
it's not really doing
and so to
the favors.
Yeah, so in that scenario, it's like we have a Goldberg and then we have a bunch of luchadors, and so then these guys are people aren't gonna take to them because in their minds they're being introduced to like, oh, these guys are losers, so screw them, they're losers. I'm not into the loser. And then the worst part about it it didn't really help the main guys either because like say like Neville, for example, we loved having him. And he's amazing. I love wrestling him. When we built it around him, it didn't help anybody that wrestled him because people were like, I forget these guys. They're not as good as him. And it didn't help the show because they were like, we want to see Neville do this on Raw. But it's like, he isn't going to go to Raw and beat Seth and everybody the same way. He's not going to run through those guys. He's doing that on this show because they thought that's what would be good for it. And so nobody wins in that scenario because he just came from Raw. And so that's what is he going to do? Go back to the same spot that you guys didn't care about him before? Like it creates a weird scenario. So I think that's where we started to run out of gas is when maybe part of the way through Neville having it was like, all right, well, guys aren't getting over now because they don't have a chance. Mm-hmm. And, once the Austin Aries story with me and Neville was kind of done, it felt like it was empty, because then Neville was just beating people and then nobody cared about his opponents. And then eventually Enzo came along and Enzo's an amazing promo and an amazing character, but then it's almost the same idea, but on the microphone. Now it's like nobody cares about the guy that Enzo's roasting. It's like, forget that guy. Enzo's funny, but that guy sucks. And so then it's like, well, who's getting over? Nobody's getting over, And I think it got better once, then it was like Kalisto, Cedric, and like guys like now the title was like moving a little bit.
That's when it started to get a little more interesting.
More equally, yeah. So I think there was like this initial, I think there was an initial period where like anybody could be anybody, so it was cool. Like the Raw fans were interested. They're like, okay, who are these new guys? But then there's this middle period where it got too much around one guy, like single guys, and it was like it lost the attention of people. And then it started to get better, I think.
Well, I know even now it's still like a network exclusive show, and I feel like in a sense that kind of hurts it at the same time.
A little bit. I feel like, it's not going to be a broader audience, and you kind of want people to be able to come across them casually, like on USA or Fox or whatever the case may be. I wish they would find time for it in that way, but they don't. But I do think it helps a little bit to have the Cruiserweight title be with NXT and NXT being, because they're still on USA, right?
Yeah.
Yes, they are.
So so that's sort of like when we had the Cruiserweights on Raw. So I would be on USA every week, and it's like my social followers shot up to 300,000-400,000 people now were following me and watching me and interested in me just because I was on that channel, as opposed to being on the network where that's just all the same wrestling fans who already knew who I was. So it doesn't really increase your presence in that way.
Yeah.
So I think that's good that they have the title be part of NXT because now it's almost like having it back on Raw again because it's on USA Network.
Yeah. Well, it has that exposure. It gets more people looking at it.
Yeah, and that's really the key.
So you know, you're out of WWE now. Do you still like watch the programming at all, or do you like tend to not keep up with it as much? Or
You know, in all honesty, and this may sound bad, but I didn't even watch it when I was there.
oh,
I watched some stuff that I thought would be interesting. Like I really loved all the Goldberg Brock matches. The whole locker room loved those. I mean, it was standing room only because they were such a spectacle. It was wild. We never knew what was going to happen.
Yeah.
And obviously, you know, you watch when the Undertaker comes in once or twice a year. You know, that was a big deal. And I would watch my friends. You know, when my friends were wrestling that night, you know, Joe or Nakamura or AJ or like.
I know, like when a lot of people leave WWE on like whether it be good terms or bad terms, it makes them like have a different feeling towards the sport of pro wrestling, like a feeling of like, I'm not gonna say hatred, but it's like kind of like dread or like
disillusioned, maybe.
Yeah. Like, did you
disillusion's a good word.
Like, did you have that feeling when you left, or?
No, not really. I mean, I knew what it was before I went in because I'd had so many experiences with them before. And I'd been around a while, so I'd worked in other places that were sort of the same type of atmosphere and like at a, you know, like a major league level and on a mainstream stage and things like that. And a lot of friends that have come in and out of there. So I got to see a little bit of when guys kind of become jaded a little bit.
Right.
But I also, you know, tried to always be fair with myself when I would see them, and I'd say, well, okay, like, so my friend or so-and-so, like, oh, they came out of it with such a negative perception, but like, why is that? And I would try to play devil's advocate and understand, like, well, this is probably why. And like I was saying before, like about like my experience with like Eric Bischoff, like when he kind of like blindsided me and Sami Zayn, like rather than take that as, oh man, this just totally treats us like we're dirt. But it's like, well, what is he really trying to say? And like, where is he coming from? Like, what is he used to doing? Like, I wanted to be able to, I try to be able to understand the other side of those things. So like for me, like going there, I kind of knew what to expect. And even when I was there, you know, like, you know, there were times where I would not allow myself to be disillusioned in certain ways because it's like, you know, I know what this is. And then sometimes just even as a human being, when you start to get caught up in it, like I would always talk myself back off the ledge and be like, you know what, like this is where people become negative or disillusioned or something like that. You know, I came to find that a lot of people that don't like it there just don't understand what it is, and they can't accept not being special, I guess. It's to them. I don't know. It's hard to describe. Like they don't like to hear no. You know, they can't be told no.
I know, like when CM Punk, when he left the company, I guess he kind of like had like almost like a pure hatred for the company. It seems like.
I've known Punk a long time. He's
really?
He's an old friend, and he's a very smart guy, and he can be temperamental and a little bit moody, but he's just more passionate than a lot of people. When he feels strongly about something, he feels very strongly about something. Right. So, you know, it just comes out in louder ways. But I think that's also what makes him a great performer, because, you know, it magnifies, you know, things about him in that way. That's just who he is. So, you know, and honestly, I've never really talked to him about what about all that. Like, usually when I do get a chance to talk to him, and like over the years, it's been less and less. Obviously, you get older and you get more busy and you go in separate directions. But I've never really asked him about that. We used to hang out a lot when he was in the company, and like during the time when he was champ and stuff, we would you know, hang out or whatever. But we rarely talked about work. But I think a lot of times, you know, it comes down to guys not like being told no, and they feel like they're cheated when they're told no. And it's like, I think guys need to understand that it's a television show, and we hear that a lot. And I don't think people really give enough credit and really think about what that means when you say it's a television show. When you say, you know, Raw or SmackDown or WWE, when you say WWE is a television show, a lot of people initially take that only on the surface, and they're like, oh yeah, I get it, because it's a lot of drama, and it's like they try to minimize the wrestling, like it doesn't matter, and you know, it's not like real pro wrestling or something like that. And that's not what I mean by it's a television show. I mean, like, literally, it's a television show. Like, it's The Walking Dead, it's The Simpsons, it's a product that's bought by TV networks to broadcast, and it's
boost their ratings.
It's episodes of television based on a cast of characters, and that cast of characters, just like any television show, is really only 5 to 10 people. Like The Simpsons is not about Chief Wiggum and, you know, Lenny and Carl, and you know, it's about The Simpsons is about Homer, Bart, you know, Lisa, Marge, Maggie, and that's it. You know, and then to a lesser extent, then you have you know Flanders, Milhouse, Mr. Burns, all that stuff. But it's really about the Simpsons. There's like, you know, 5 people, give or take, that it's about. Walking Dead, you know, it's about, you know, Carl. It's about, you know, all the main characters, Michonne, you know, all these guys. Like, and but WWE is like 100 people.
Yeah.
But you're not really all on this show. Like, you're on it, but you're not really part of the cast. You know what I mean? And that's where guys have trouble, because like, I think once you get there, and especially once you get on to like Raw, you think, all right, I'm in, I made it, I'm part of the show. And it's like, but you're really not. And you have to kind of have a certain understanding and acceptance of what that means, because when WWE meets with their stockholders quarterly, when they meet with advertisers and you know, Snickers or Pizza Hut over something, when they meet with the venue for SummerSlam or WrestleMania a year prior to those events, they have to go into these meetings and basically have a television show pitch. When they renew with USA, when they get picked up by Fox, they have to present their show or have a meeting where it's like they're the creators of The Simpsons. And those people on the other side in the suits and ties, they're like, what is your show? What it's about? And WWE administration has to be like, here's our show. This is WWE. This is Brock Lesnar. This is Roman Reigns. This is Sasha Banks. This is Charlotte. This is Becky. This is Seth Rollins. Like, these are our guys. And then they say, great, that's awesome. And like, that's why you see like a lot of times when there's a new network deal or something like that, all of a sudden it's like they shoehorn the Undertaker in and Brock Lesnar and all these guys, because that is part of the pitch meeting that gets them over the top, and that's what's being sold. So when they talked,
I was like, kind of like when SmackDown just debuted on Fox, last year, 2 years ago, and they had Brock being kind of like one of those things.
Yeah, so you have to understand that to advertisers and, you know, whoever, investors, you know, venues for the big shows, they're selling a show to them, and they're doing it 6-8 months, a year in advance. They're not just doing it a month out. So a lot of times, like, it's so funny because like wrestlers, they'll go in like December or January, and they're like, I'm going to pitch some stuff to Vince, and I'm going to get the ball rolling for WrestleMania. Dude, they know what WrestleMania is.
Yeah, they already got that penciled in.
You better be pitching for next year's WrestleMania, because that's done. And the reason is because they've already sold a poster with 5 guys on it and what is probably their main event and like what, you know, who's going to do what and what stories are going to be told. Over the course of the year, if they detour from that just because you had a meeting with Vince and sold him this great idea that you could wrestle this guy and win this title and do this story, they're not like, if they start changing all that stuff throughout the course of the year, investors, advertisers, they're going to be like, where's this character? We paid for this character. Why is he not finishing the show? Where is this guy? Why is this match not happening? Like, they bought the show already. So it's kind of like, you know, if you're The Walking Dead and let's say in episode 2 of the season, you know, there's this kind of guest character that's awesome, total badass, and helps them escape something, or, you know, helps them, you know, get out of trouble or whatever. and fans love it.
Right.
Like, that season is already taped, and they've already written that season. That character is not just going to magically start being on every episode just because people like him. Like, at best, the creators are going to be like, okay, let's try to get him in a few episodes next season because he's really popular. Let's explore it down the line. You know, that's what WWE is. It's a television show. It's built like a television show. It's planned like one. It's invested in like one. It's presented like one. It's sold like one. It's bought like one. That's what it is. So when they've created that, they're not just going to detour it just because some guy is super hot. Like, they'll do their best. And I think that Vince and a lot of the creative, they don't get enough credit for how much they actually do their best to try and do things that probably wasn't part of the plans, you know?
Because that was something
just
I really
to try and get the So they, I mean, like, they'll try really hard to be like, oh man, this got a great reaction. Let's ride with it next week. Let's do it again. Let's do it again. And they'll do their best, but then people get mad. They're like, oh, it was going so well. Why didn't he just become world champion? Because they've already sold that story. You know, like, that's not the guy. Like, and even then, sometimes they'll still do it, but they have to get back to square one at some point, because, like, at some point, the people that are pouring money, millions and millions of dollars into the company, they're like, at a certain point, they have to answer to those people. Like, why are we not seeing this guy or that guy? You know?
Yeah.
That's what we paid for. Yeah. That's really what it is. Is like, it's beyond your control because guys don't understand what it is. It's a television show, not because it's drama, but because literally it's a cast of characters that's only 5 or 10 people deep. Everybody else is just Lenny and Carl.
Oh, wow. Okay. So I never looked at it like that. So that kind of helps explain it.
Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's the thing is, like, I think a lot of guys that are bitter, they just don't understand that part of it. And they or if they do, they can't accept it. And that's fair. I mean, if you don't like it, then you can leave. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I had wanted to leave. I met with Vince a year before my release, and I told him, I said, I don't feel like I'm worth anything to you. I'm just a guy. I would like to be a better character. I know that obviously that takes time. So I told him I don't want to quit, but if I can't do better, then I will eventually want to leave, and I want to do better. How can I do better for you? What would you want me to do to be that guy? So, you know, I met with him repeatedly for like a year trying to figure that out. And we would come up with different ideas, but, you know, like I said, I mean, he has the people in place that he foresaw, okay, this is who I'm rolling with for a few years. And he respected my proactive, my proactivity, my bravery, I guess, and my fearlessness about it, that I would just go to him and say, I would like to do better. But, you know, it's kind of like, well, where do I make that change? You know, like, is he going to swap out Seth for me? No, like, he's not going to Finn. Like, he's not going to do that. Like, this is what he's chosen. And in his mind, all the other guys were the Lenny and Carls. So he had like a Carl come up and say, can I try and be in the Bart position, and what can I do? And it's like, okay, let's try, but we can't get rid of Bart. So what are we going to do?
Yeah, like Vince, he was one of those people that was kind of like, I guess, easy to talk to in a sense when it came to something like that, or?
I mean, it depends on who you are as a person, I think, because a lot of people are intimidated or scared of him. A lot of people are terrified of just his door. Like, they don't even want to knock on his door. They're so scared, you know?
Right.
But when you talk to him, and, you know, maybe he kind of gives you a different side of himself than he is when you're not around. But when you talk to him, he's very quiet and kind of soft-spoken. At least whenever I spoke to him, he was quiet, soft-spoken. He listened a lot, would listen to everything I had to say, never would cut me off or anything. And he would always offer me advice on how to make an idea better, or offer me something that he's like, well, this needs to go like this because, and maybe I'm not thinking of something. He's like, maybe you're missing this. And, you know, he would tell me when he thinks something's a good idea or maybe something's a bad idea. And he was always positive, like encouraging. Like, it was never like, oh, that's not going to work. Like, get out of my face. Like, it was never like that. It was always like, okay, like, write something up, you know, turn it into creative. We'll talk about it as a group, and, you know, we'll see what we can do. Or if he really liked the idea, or if, you know, whatever, he would just be like, all right, let's let's see how we can make this work. He was always like that. But a lot of guys just don't get that far with him because they're too afraid to talk to him.
So he wasn't really as bad as like different like journalists and websites make him out to be with certain things, then was he? I know you read some of that and saw some of that.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't know what to expect when I first had got to the company. I remember like my very first TV or pay-per-view that I did, I knocked on his door just because, like, I'm not afraid of anybody anyway, and I'm not the type of person that I don't get starstruck or intimidated by people. That's just how I am. You could be the Undertaker, or you could be anybody. I'd look at you the same way. It doesn't matter to me.
Right.
But I didn't know what to expect with Vince. So, I'm certainly not afraid of him or his door. So I knocked on his door. I'm like, all right, I got to get to know this guy. I got to talk to him. So, I'm dressed nice and presented myself respectfully and had a conversation with him. And basically I didn't really need anything from him. So I just kind of had my first conversation with him, asking him what he expected of me. Like, what do you want me to do for you in this company? Like, what would you like to see? What are you missing that you want guys to do? And how can I do that for you? And that's when I was like, okay, this guy's actually he's really great to talk to. But I think though, when talent isn't around and maybe it's him and producers and other office people, he can be maybe temperamental and maybe a little bit more like shrewd, or the type of guy that you hear about. But right. I don't think he's ever quite as extreme as the narratives about him. Right. It's just like, like a lot of that just doesn't make sense. You're a billionaire, you're playing with millions of dollars. Like, why would you don't have time to be that way. I don't think. Like, it's counterproductive. So I do think that he can probably be a little bit tough and a little bit like extreme and at times, but I don't think he's the way that people say. And I think a lot of times people just don't like being uncomfortable, and they don't like hearing no. They don't like being told no for stuff. So sometimes they'll say, he's so controlling, or he's temperamental. He's an insane billionaire that makes you want to do all this stuff, or that forces you to do all this stuff. But it's like, I mean, dude, he's Matt Groening, and The Simpsons is his show. What do you expect? Like, this isn't a show by committee, dude. It's his baby. Like, what do you want? Like,
so basically, they kind of like paint him out to be more or less a jackass. That's what they kind of paint him out to be, but he's not really like that. He kind of comes from a good place for what he does.
Yes, and I don't think he's out of touch necessarily. I mean, there's some things, of course, he's going to be a little out of touch. I mean, he's literally a billionaire. I don't know. I remember asking somebody one time that like kind of was more in his like upper circle, like that's part of his like normal day to day. I was like, does this guy ever drive a car? Like, what's his life like? When's the last time this guy went to the movies or the grocery store? Like, I can't imagine it. So like, in some ways I thought, well, he's got to be out of touch because there's so many elements of his life that is probably not like normal people.
Yeah.
So like, I think that there's certain things that like, maybe he has a hard time understanding, like how to relate to people referentially, but he's really smart and sharp and intuitive on learning how people think. So it's like, he may not understand what's cool anymore, but he understands how to get somebody to identify that and to lean into it. So like, it's like, it's kind of like the old adage, like you can give a fish or teach somebody how to fish. Like, he may not know what fish to give you, but he'll teach you how to fish for that fish. Essentially, he'll be able to nurture that. So he's a lot sharper than people think he is. It's just, obviously he's 70 years old. He doesn't know what's cool anymore.
Right.
So we're gonna try and keep you on here too much long. I know we've kind of been running on for 2 hours. I know you got things you want to get done too. A couple things I do want to ask you. Like, I know you've wrestled for Impact, New Japan, WWE, Ring of Honor. Have you ever looked at going to AEW in any capacity?
Not a whole lot. I have a lot of friends there, and I've talked to some of the people that sort of work like with talent and stuff there, just to kind of touch base with them professionally if maybe there's something I can do. But we never really talk at length, and it's not really like a goal of mine necessarily.
Right.
I mean, I don't know that they really need me. I mean, they got a lot of talented guys that, I mean, can do all the stuff that I can do. A lot of my friends that work there, I mean, they're not missing me, I don't think. But I would if they, you know, if they wanted me to or whatever. But it's not something that I'm actively like
trying to do.
Yeah, like I don't contact them all the time to kind of like touch base and see where we're at or something like that. Like, you know, talk to them once or twice, and mostly just to touch base a little bit. But I also have a lot of friends there, so a lot of times I just try to catch up with friends mostly.
Now, I know you probably heard about JR's comments too about like the dives and like.
Oh yeah.
You heard about all that?
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah.
Like, what are your thoughts? Like, I know a lot of people got basically pissed about it, and some people like took up for him too at the same time. So, like, what were your thoughts when he said that?
My only thought was that I just think the method of transferring that message is like I think you do that to a person directly, you know?
Right.
Like, I don't necessarily think he's right or wrong. It's not, because it's not, there's no such thing as right or wrong. It's subjective. You know, what we have is art. Like, at best, if nobody got hurt and people are willing to pay money for what you did, then you're right. That's good enough. You know what I mean? Like, outside of that, like, it's insane to sit and say, well, this is what real pro wrestling is, and this is like, there's no such thing as real pro wrestling. We're creating it like
you create a
from
story.
scratch.
It is a story.
So yeah, like, so, you know, we have an old saying, the only thing that's real is the money and the miles.